Okay. Okay. Is there a way to hide this? Hide floating meeting controls. Yeah. There we go. Okay, so yeah, today we have our own Justin Raizes. He will be talking about threshold secret sharing with certified deletion. And I guess this is joint with James Barczyk.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for the introduction. So before we get started, I have a pop quiz for you. Let's say that you've got some information and you don't want to store it yourself, but you don't trust one person to store it for you. What do you do? How do you store your information securely? Anyone have any ideas? It's written on the slide.
You bury the secrets.
So find two people and give one of them some random number and give the other people like the XOR of the random number and give the information.
Exactly, we do secret sharing. So that if one person gets it, then this is not. Yeah. So we split our secret into a bunch of different parts. And we have the security guarantee that if any two people have it, so for example here, any set of 3 is authorized, but any set of 2 is not. So if the adversary only collects 2 shares, they get no information about the secret. Now, a really nice property of secret sharing is it doesn't require any computational assumptions at all. This is really nice because we don't have to worry about P versus NP or average case hardness or anything like that. There's still an assumption here though. Is it really safe to assume that additional data won't be leaked over long periods of time? There's a reason you update your passwords every so often, right? You all do that, right? No? Come on. Anyway, case in point, when I was making this presentation, the very first day I started, I just Googled data breaches and I found something 2 days ago. So it happens frequently. So with the data breach, the adversary gets a 3rd share and suddenly we've lost all security. They just get the secret. So the question that we study in this work is whether or not we can protect against adversaries who eventually corrupt an authorized set of shares. Right? If they corrupt an authorized set of shares, then if you use normal secret sharing, they should just be able to reconstruct the secret. Classically, there's nothing we can do. If you get a secret, you can just copy it like this guy is copying an old book. That's where the quantum piece comes in. So the idea is we're going to take a classical secret and we're going to split it into a number of quantum shares. And it's possible to do a destructive measurement on these shares. And when you do this measurement, it deletes all of the useful information in that share. So now this gives us the nice ability where a user who doesn't trust the storage company can say, hey, I don't trust you anymore, or maybe I just don't want you to store my information anymore, right? I'm terminating the contract. It says, and so please delete my information. And the storage company can say, sure, here's the confirmation. And then the user can check it and say, yeah, you've definitely deleted my information. So in this work, we have 3 main contributions. The first is definitions for secret sharing with verified deletion. The second one, of course, is constructions. It's less interesting to have definitions that we can't achieve, of course. And the last piece is a new tool, which is a high-rate randomness extractor for certain quantum entropy sources. I'm going to revisit that one a little bit later and define what I mean by certain quantum entropy sources. That'll be towards the end of the talk. All right, let's start with the definition side of things. For inspiration, let's look at encryption with certified deletion. In encryption with certified deletion, the adversary starts with a ciphertext. It deletes it by producing a valid certificate. And then after it produces a valid certificate, it gets the key and tries to guess whether or not the message is M0 or M1. And we want the guarantee to be that even if this all occurs, the adversary still should not be able to guess better than a 50-50 random chance. All right, let's try adapting this. So here we've split our secret into 7 total shares. And if you have 5 of them, then you can get the secret. Let's say the adversary manages to collect 4. And then these 3 over here does not yet have access to it. This side is kind of similar to the ciphertext, and this side is similar to the key if we're looking at our previous definition of encryption. Then the adversary deletes some of these, and once it's done so, it gets the rest. And we want it to be the case that even if it gets all of these, it still can't guess the secret. This is a nice starting point, but unfortunately, it's not meaningful for all access structures. For example, it could be the case that all of these shares that the adversary didn't receive are already authorized on their own. Right? So if we made 9 total shares, the adversary got 4, and then it gets the remaining 5 later, then just these 5 shares are enough to reconstruct the secret. It could have deleted everything, honestly. So to deal with this, we actually come up with 2 different definitions. There's non-signaling certified deletion, which is going to capture kind of a fast but distributed adversary. And then there's adaptive certified deletion, which is going to capture a slower, more methodical, adversary, but one that can keep corrupting things over time. And I'll go into the details a little bit more, but I'd like to note that these 2 definitions are actually incomparable. Let's start with non-signaling certified deletion. So we start off with our 6 shares, and any 3 of them are authorized. We're going to consider a multi-part adversary, where each part gets an unauthorized set. So this adversary down here gets share 4, that adversary up there gets share 6 and share 5. And the restriction we're going to place on them is that they can't communicate with each other. However, they can share prior intent. Then they're going to delete some number of shares. They get to choose which ones. Again, this is without communicating. And if the remaining undeleted shares are still not authorized, so in this case, there are 2 undeleted shares. This is less than 3, so it's not authorized. Then we let them combine their views. And the requirement we have is at the end of this experiment with their combined views, it should be indistinguishable whether or not the secret was S0 or S1 to begin with. There's a great spot for questions, so I'm just going to let you think about this for a moment, and please ask anything if you have questions. The definition making sense to everyone? Great. So surprise, surprise, our first theorem is that we can actually construct such a scheme. And in particular, we can construct it for any monotone access structure S. Here, S is just a set of authorized sets. So if a set A is in S, then it's authorized and it can reconstruct the secret. The monotonicity requirement is just that if we have a set A that's authorized and there's a larger set that contains A, then that set is also authorized. So you don't lose anything by having more shares. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the construction then. First, I'm going to recall a very limited form of secret sharing that some prior work did. Bartusek and Karana explicitly looked at this form of secret sharing, and the original certified deletion paper by Broadbent and Islam can also be viewed as having introduced this form. The idea is that we are going to split a secret into a quantum share and a classical share. If the adversary gets the quantum share, but not the classical share, it can delete this share. And if it does so, then even if it later receives the classical share, it still has no information about the secret. I'd like to emphasize that only the quantum share can be deleted. The classical share is classical information. There's no way to get rid of it. And for now, the details of the construction actually aren't important. For our first construction, we're going to use this in a black box manner.
So you're not going to explain how delusion works?
Yes, I'm not going to explain it now. In the later construction for adaptive certified deletion, we're going to have to build that from scratch. So I will explain how deletion works. Okay. Let's make a starting point. So we're going to try and achieve deletable secret sharing for any access structure, but with the slight restriction that only one of the shares is going to be able to be deleted. So step one, let's go ahead and split our secret using the 2 of 2 secret sharing from Bartusek and Karana's paper. Then we can take the classical share and we can split that one further. And the split we're going to do there is just using any classical secret sharing scheme for an access structure S. Now, the quantum share is going to be publicly available, and anyone can go to that register and delete it. Let's say that the adversary got access to just a couple of shares, and these are unauthorized. It also gets access to the quantum share. Well, it doesn't have any information about the classical share. So if it deletes the quantum share, then we should expect the same security out of the 2 out of 2 scheme. Right? Even if it later learns the rest of the classical shares, this only reveals the original 2 out of 2 classical share. So the original secret is lost. Okay, great. This lets us delete one share, but ideally we'd like anyone to be able to delete. So let's go ahead and move to the full scheme. We're going to start by secret sharing our secret with a classical scheme for the access structure S. Then we're going to apply the compiler that we just made that gives out one deletable share. And we'll do this for each and every of these shares. And then we'll reorganize these a little bit so that share 1 gets the quantum piece of SH1, as well as a classical piece of SH1, a classical piece of SH2, and so on. So if you had enough shares, you could combine the pieces of SH6, for example, to get SH6, and then you could recover many of these shares. And then, well, you combine those with the quantum piece, and then you can recover these shares, and then those give you the secret. Let's say that the adversary gets a hold of some unauthorized set of shares. Here, well, let's say that it gets share 1 and share 2. Here I've illustrated the pieces of SH1 that it's collected, right? It also has some different pieces of, say, SH2. But crucially, it doesn't have anything else from SH1. So if it deletes the quantum piece of SH1, then we can use the same security that we just talked about for the prior compiler, and SH1 is gone. So if enough of these middle level shares are lost, but the bottom level shares, then we completely lost the original secret. And that's the construction. Not too bad, is it?
Can you go to the previous animation? So why is it that you have to do many CSH? Like each party will get access to one of those CSH.
Right. So the idea, let's back up a little bit. The idea is these bottom, this is the previous compiler that only has one deletable scheme. Here, the way that we hid CSH is we split it into many pieces. So if you collect enough of these pieces, you can get CSH. But if you had CSH in your view when you also had QSH in your view,
right, then
deletion doesn't work. So when we fast forward a little bit and look at this, here we need to break up SH1 further so that we can actually delete it. Essentially what we did is we just added a level on top of our prior scheme and then made it so that each of these top level shares can be deleted.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
So then, can you say like the first party, what are the shares that the first party does?
Yeah. So, like you to pay attention, the subscript here,
Okay,
swap actually. The idea is we split SH1 into many pieces.
Yeah.
But party 1 is only going to get the quantum piece of SH1 as well as one classical piece of SH1. It's then going to receive its corresponding share, classical share of SH2, and corresponding classical share of SH3, and so on. And then it'll be similar for other shares. So party 2 will get quantum share 2 as well as the second piece of each top level share. Is there anything else about this construction before we move on?
So it's like an n square complexity thing.
Yeah, it's not particularly efficient, especially when you consider that secret sharing for general access structures is generally not efficient.
Okay. So if you only have like threshold.
Yeah, if you have threshold sharing, then it's like n squared. And another thing to remember is that we still do get information theoretic security, which is nice.
Do you have any idea of, say, lower bounds for this?
No, that's actually a really good question. And I think it's one I forgot to put on the slides.
Okay.
But yeah, Like I said, it's a great question. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to mention a whole bunch of different questions that are still open. It's a really fascinating area. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to adaptive certified deletion. So we're going to start off with 6 shares and any 3 are authorized. Right now, the adversary on that side does not have access to any of them. One at a time, the adversary gets to do 2 different things. It can corrupt a share. So here it says, I want to corrupt share 1, it gets share 1. Or it can delete a share by giving out its certificate. If the certificate is invalid, then the experiment immediately aborts. The adversary can keep doing this as long as it likes, but there is one constraint on it. It's not allowed to possess a set of intact shares, which are authorized. So here it already possesses 2 different shares which have not yet been deleted. If it corrupted a third, then it would have a set of shares which is authorized and has not yet been deleted. So the next move it has to make is either to end the experiment early, or it can delete a share. Like so. Right, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and just rush to the end of the experiment so that you don't have to see shares flying across the screen a whole bunch. The security guarantee that we want is at the end of the experiment, when the adversary has gotten the chance to corrupt every share, then it still should not be able to tell whether the secret was S0 or S1. And I would like to emphasize again that the adversary does get the chance to corrupt every single share in the system. Are there any questions about this definition?
In the real situation, one adversary that can eventually learn all the shares have to delete some shares.
Right. So in a real situation, for example, you might imagine that I've split my secret, I've sent it to a whole bunch of storage providers, and now I want to terminate my contract with one of the storage providers. Of course, I want to prevent them from deciding that because I am no longer paying them, they're just going to sell my share to the highest bidder. So they would delete it. And you can imagine this keeps going on and on and on, where eventually I'm shrinking my pool of shares that are still existing out in the wild. Another thing is if I suspect a data breach, then I can actually ask a company to delete the share. Okay, so this is all really going to say that there are a lot of scenarios where an adversary might corrupt shares, but then in order to avoid setting off any alarms, it might actually comply with user requests to delete the information. And in the background, it just quietly keeps accumulating shares without setting off any alarms. Any other questions about the definition? Okay. Surprise, surprise. Our next theorem is that we're able to achieve this. Specifically, though, we're only able to achieve threshold secret sharing schemes, where there are n total shares and any k are authorized. This is a little different from our prior construction, which was for any monotone access structure. And we are leaving it as an open problem whether or not you can achieve any monotone access structure with adaptive certified deletion. I'd also like to note that this scheme doesn't use entanglement. If you had a single qubit quantum computer and single qubit quantum storage, but many of these units of single qubit quantum storage. You could actually perform this today. The only thing that you have to do the only quantum computation that you have to do to be able to construct these secrets or this sharing is just single qubit operations. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into how this definition differs from no signaling and why they're incomparable. If you are interested, you can look at the paper, or I'm happy to talk about it a little bit after during the question section. Okay, so let's move on to the construction. And as a reminder, we're working with threshold access structures where there are n total shares and any k are authorized. Okay. Let's look at the previous scheme and see why it doesn't satisfy this definition. The first thing that really pops out is we have a quantum share here, and then we have a whole bunch of classical information in this share. The quantum piece can be deleted, but the classical pieces can never be deleted. So let's say that an adversary corrupts 3 shares. See them kind of arrayed across the top. This is share 1, this is share 2, this is share 3. And let's say that any 3 are authorized. And in fact, I'm even going to have this adversary delete their share immediately after they receive it. So they receive the top one, they delete this. And this gets rid of this first column, which corresponds to that quantum share. The second column corresponds to the second quantum share. And the third column corresponds to the third quantum share. There's no way of retrieving SH1, SH2, or SH3 anymore. However, we have a authorized set corresponding to SH4, an authorized set corresponding to SH5, and an authorized set corresponding to SH6. So we can reconstruct the classical pieces from the 2 out of 2 sharing for those shares. Now, when we receive the 4th share, we can just immediately combine that with what we just reconstructed to get SH4. I'd like to note that this is deterministic. So if you measure the reconstructed SH4, you don't disturb the state at all. This means that even after you've reported SH4, you can still delete the quantum piece. And then we just rinse and repeat, and we get SH5 and SH6. At this point, we have 3 shares from the top level sharing, so we get the secret.
So in some sense, when you combine the classical share of 4 and the quantum share of 4, when you combine them to get SH4, it doesn't destroy the quantum state.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So the reason for that is that the reconstruction is fully deterministic. So when you learn SH4, when you measure it, doing that measurement doesn't change the system at all.
Okay.
Will you go into like an example of why this happens? Why you have deterministic, it doesn't change the quantum state?
So I didn't do slides for it, but the general intuition here, I should have accounted for the fact that we have non-quantum people in the audience, I'm sorry. The general intuition here is that when you do a measurement on a quantum state, you are asking, are you aligned with this particular basis? So are you a 0 or are you a 1? Now, if you are a 0 or a 1, then this state is, or the result of the measurement is fully determined, and you are guaranteed to get, let's say you were a 0 to begin with, and you measured it to ask whether or not you were a 0 or 1, it will always return 0. And the interesting piece about doing a quantum measurement is that at the end of the measurement, the state becomes whatever the measurement result was. But in the case where it's deterministic, the original state is the same as the measurement result. So you are not changing the state. If you, on the other hand, you had a state which was in between 0 and 1, but it isn't exactly equal to 0 or 1, the measurement result still has to be 0 or 1. So at the end of the measurement, you've changed the state because the state is now either 0 or 1 at the end of the measurement. I hope that generally made sense. Yes.
So, how do you certify that the state is deleted? So I would assume, like, if you want to measure, you measure in the same basis as the state, but if you want to delete it, you measure in a different basis, which will
Yes.
essentially return a random number. And how does a random number can serve as a certificate of deletion?
We're going to get to that in a little bit. That'll appear when, actually next slide. So
Okay.
let me get to that. So let's go ahead and unwrap the BK23 scheme. In here, we'll see that the quantum share consists of a number of data positions. These are going to be encoded in one basis. And it'll also have some check positions, which don't have any information about the data, about the secret. And the only reason that they exist is to be encoded in the second basis, so that we can do the checks. I'll go into a little bit more detail a little bit later as well. But the idea is just that in order to check that somebody has actually measured in the incorrect basis and the destructive basis, we just check the results of their measurements on the check positions. And this tells us that intuitively most of the data positions are measured. Right, it's similar to if you had a classical string and somebody tells you that the classical string is such and such, right? You could, with high probability, be convinced that the string is very close to what they said it is just by looking at a few indices of the actual string. Now, the other share includes the mapping of which positions are data positions and which positions are check positions. And in fact, this information is actually necessary to decode because we need to know which positions are.
Is it just a 0-1 string?
Yeah, it's just a 0-1 string, exactly. Yeah, because if we don't know where the data positions are, we can't extract the information from them. Okay, well, the problem here is that string, that mapping there, which tells us where the data positions are and where the check positions are, that can't be deleted because it's fully classical. Yeah.
Well, but if the adversary has the which positions are check positions, so the adversary can he just like measure these check positions and get the certificate and still keep the data?
Yes, if you knew where the check positions were. That's the trick is when in the certified deletion game, the adversary only gets this information and not that top mapping. And intuitively, the check positions are actually identically distributed to the data positions if you don't know, because they're uniformly random.
Yeah.
This is something I'm not going to go too much more into depth on, so you'll just have to take me on my word.
So basically, when you have the classical share here, you cannot delete the.
Exactly, and that was the problem that we saw before. Because if you, like you said, if we have the classical share and the quantum share at the same time, then we can produce a fake certificate, a valid certificate, without actually deleting the information. Because we can just measure these and these they're not checked. Okay, so in order to get adaptive certified deletion, it seems like we need to protect theta. This mapping. But how do we protect theta? It's a classical string. We need adaptive certified deletion. It's a little problematic. So the approach that we're going to take is we're actually going to enable reconstruction without knowledge of the check indices. And to do this, we're going to base the approach on polynomial secret sharing, where the shares are actually evaluations of the polynomial. And it turns out that this has good error correcting properties. It's closely related to Reed-Solomon codes. So each share is going to consist of some number of polynomial evaluations, where f is some polynomial, it's over a finite field, and f of 0 is the secret. The polynomial has some degree d. I'm not going to go into how we tune d, but just know that it exists. There are also key points per share. Now, you might notice that mixed in with these evaluations are some things that are not evaluations. These shares are going to act, or these pieces are going to act as the check positions. And what they are is they are a random value which is encoded in an incompatible basis. In this case, it's the Fourier basis. So we just, to generate it, that's supposed to be a 2 there. No worries. So to generate this position, we would generate a random value y1, and then we just apply one Fourier transform to it. And the idea is, if you were to measure in the Fourier basis, if you were to measure this, then you would get y1, and here you would get y2. And that's deterministic, so it doesn't disturb the state. But if you were to measure this in the Fourier basis, it destroys the information completely. So intuitively, for deletion, we just want the adversary to measure at least most of the share in the Fourier basis. I should have moved to the previous slide before saying, or to the next slide before saying that, because that's what this slide says, is the Fourier basis and the computational basis are mutually exclusive. We measure this in the computational basis, then you can't find y1. On the other hand, if you measure this piece in the Fourier basis, you can't find f of 4. And since you don't know which positions are which, you don't know which measurement to perform on each position. So to delete a share, you just measure every index in the Fourier basis. And this is going to match on any indices which actually were in the Fourier basis. So it will match on the check positions. This means that to verify the certificate, we just have to check that the certificate matches in those check positions. Which makes sense. Are there any questions on it? Okay, cool. Now let's move to reconstruction. Let's say that we've got a whole bunch of shares. Oh, I forgot to mention. There are R of these check positions per share. So we have a large number of evaluations of F. And these evaluations are mixed with check positions which have absolutely nothing to do with F. These positions are basically just random errors. So what we want is that if you have an authorized set of shares, then you actually have enough evaluations of F to correct these errors. So specifically, we're going to tune the degree, the number of points per share, and the number of checks per share, so that any k-1 shares reveal less than d points of f, in which case the polynomial is undetermined, they have no information about the secret. And at the same time, k shares are authorized, and they have kr errors. So since they're authorized, we should be able to correct k times r errors, and this gives us f.
In some sense, the reconstruction doesn't require the position map. It
Exactly.
only uses like error correction.
Exactly. Yeah. And it turns out polynomials have pretty good error correction. It's actually a maximal error correction.
Now you don't need the classical position map information. Just
Exactly. We don't need to encode that, which means we
Yeah.
aren't stuck in the cycle anymore.
How do you reconstruct this to get like a classical result?
Right. So what you can do is you can measure
everything.
everything in the classical basis.
Right.
This gives you a bunch of equations of f and a bunch of completely random
Yeah.
garbage. Then you apply the error correction procedure to find the original f, and then you just evaluate it at f of 0.
But after you reconstruct, can you still delete?
Yes, you can actually do the error correction procedure coherently, which means you do it without measuring. Yeah, this is getting a little bit more into the part where you actually need to know some quantum computing for.
So basically, quantum,
Yeah.
the error correction would be a quantum algorithm instead of classical.
No, it is a classical algorithm. What you can do is you can measure each of these positions, and this will give you classical values. So it'll give you as a classical value f of 54, and then for this error position, this check position as an error, it'll give you just some random value.
So I think the question was like, can you still certify delete these shares after?
Yes, so there is a way to transform the classical algorithm into a quantum algorithm, where doing the error correction, essentially you're going to do the error correction and you're going to measure the result. The result is deterministic because you can tolerate these errors. So measuring the result does not collapse the prior state, and then you can uncompute the computation and get back to the original state. Yeah, like I said, it requires a little bit more knowledge of quantum computation for that part.
So, so for the classical one, so is it always possible for the error correction algorithm that like for any k you can tune the t and r to satisfy this?
For any k, yes. There's also a hidden parameter here, which I have not mentioned. It's the security parameter. Normally, this doesn't show up in secret sharing because we just have perfect security. But in the case of certified deletion, intuitively, the number of check positions needs to scale with the security parameter so that we can say that with high probability, it's like negligible in the security parameter, the adversary is actually deleted.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, you can tune dt and r as well as lambda for any setting of n and k. Or I guess any setting of n, k, and lambda. The shares do end up a little bit large. So one of those open questions I keep mentioning is, can we get smaller shares? Okay. Now I'm going to move to the security proof. It's already been about 45 minutes, so I'm just going to go over a few pieces of it so that we can make certain that we get to the high rate extractor that I mentioned earlier. So the end goal of our security proof is to show that the adversary cannot tell the difference between real shares and shares which were generated uniformly at random and completely independently. Right, because if the shares were generated uniformly at random and independently, then they're independent of the secret. So the adversary can't tell the difference between secret 0 and secret 1. I'm going to introduce a little bit of notation. C sub A is the, that should be 8th share to be corrupted, and B sub B is the bth share to be deleted. Sorry about that. Okay, now I'd like to note that in the case of threshold secret sharing, the adversary must delete DB before it corrupts CB plus K minus 1. Or else it's going to control too many shares, right? So if it has B plus K minus 1 total shares, and it's deleted B minus 1 of them, then it has K total shares that have not yet been deleted. It controls an authorized set. There's nothing we can do. Okay, let's go ahead and go over BK22 because their techniques are going to be really useful for us. So here, the quantum share is a bunch of qubits that are randomly in the computational basis or the Hadamard basis. And then share 2 is just going to contain this mapping of which shares are, or which qubits are in the computational basis or the Hadamard basis. And then it's also going to contain the secret masked by the parity of the bits that were encoded in the computational basis. The verification key is also going to consist of X and theta. So given these, you can check all the positions in the Hadamard basis. The first step to the proof is we're actually going to delay the dependence of the experiment on the secret. And in particular, we're going to delay the construction of SH1. So what we do is we form the state called the EPR pair, and we give the adversary half of it, and the challenger keeps half. Now, there are two neat parts about EPR pairs. First, half an EPR pair is completely indistinguishable from a uniformly random state. It's actually exactly a uniformly random state. And the second thing that's really nice is the challenger's copy is going to mirror the adversary's copy for the first measurement that's made. So what this means is that for all intents and purposes, the challenger's copy is exactly whatever share the adversary ends up with. So that means that we don't actually have to measure X when we create the adversary's copy. Instead, we can create their copy, and then we can measure the challenger's copy. We get X, and then we derive S using S prime. The second step of their proof is they need to show that after the adversary deletes share 1, then it's actually been deleted. And what I mean by actually been deleted is the challenger's copy is now going to satisfy some checkable predicate. And if that predicate is true, then we know it's been deleted. Intuitively, this predicate just says that if you measure this in the computational basis, it has high entropy. Remember that to delete something, the adversary needs to measure it in the Fourier basis. And if it did that honestly, then this statement would be very true, right? If you measure something in the Fourier basis And then in the computational basis, it has maximal entropy. Of course, the deletion is actually imperfect here because, for example, it gets a very small number of data positions and it's right with some low probability, but still polynomial. So we're just settling for high entropy. And the way that we're going to show that the predicate holds with high probability is the adversary doesn't have that mapping theta. It doesn't know which ones are check positions and which ones are data positions. So this register actually just looks uniformly random to it. It has no information about what's going on. And that means predicate hold with high probability. I'm not going to go into the details on this. Yeah, we can talk about it afterwards in the question section if we have some extra time. All right, the last step of their proof is we need to actually do something with this challenger's copy now that we know that it satisfies the predicate. All right, let's measure to get X after we've checked the predicate. Turns out that, right, so measure to get X, and then we can derive the secret S by taking the XOR of S prime with the computational, with the parity of the computational basis pieces of X. And it turns out that if the predicate holds, then doing an XOR and taking the parity is actually a good extractor, and it's going to produce a uniformly random bit. So this means the secret is uniformly random, and in particular, it's independent of the original secret. Okay. That's what they did. Now we need to map it to what we were going to do. So our goal is to adapt their proof. And let's, for the sake of concreteness, let's try and replace the third share to be deleted, or the third share to be corrupted with uniform randomness. First thing we need to do is delay. Now, because the first two shares to be corrupted don't yet determine the polynomial, we can just sample these uniformly at random. We actually also get a little bit of the third share for free as uniformly random because the degree of the polynomial is slightly larger than what's contained in the two shares. Let's say that the adversary deletes C2 first, so C2 is the same as D1 now, and then asks to corrupt C3. So we need to prepare C3, and the way we do this is we just do a polynomial interpolation to get the rest of the evaluation points of F. And we'll use C1, C2, and this little piece of C3 to do that interpolation. Then, once we've interpolated it, we can just copy the classical information over to the adversary's register and hand that register to them. And we can keep going like this to find the rest of the shares. So here, green, anything in green is interpolated, anything in blue was uniformly sampled. So for example, for C6, maybe we use C3, C5, and then this little piece of D3 to interpolate it. The requirement for interpolation is you have to have, if I recall correctly, D+1 point on the polynomial where the polynomial has degree D. Now, the only requirement I'm going to place here is to interpolate the B plus K minus 1th share, you should use DB. So for example, C6 here is interpolated using D4 because in this case, any 3 shares are authorized, so K is 3. Intuitively, the reason that we require this is because D4 is going to provide the randomness needed to convert C6 into uniformly random. We'll explore that a little bit more soon. Although we're getting toward the end of this. No, well, yeah, this will show up in the next slide or two. Okay. So that's step 1. We've delayed everything. Now we need to show that everything satisfies the deletion. So let's look at the first thing to be deleted. This is C2. And C2 is uniformly random. So it's actually not too hard to show that it does satisfy the deletion predicate with high probability. On the other hand, if we're doing this later, right, we need to do this for each share. This is looking ahead to when we're going to change, for example, C4 to uniformly random. We would need to show that D2 satisfies the deletion predicate. Unfortunately, C3, which is D2 here, is not uniformly random. So it's not immediately clear how to argue that it satisfies the deletion predicate. There's going to be our first barrier. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip. This is how we solve that because we are very much out of time. But now let's just assume that we can show that the deletion predicate holds with high probability. The last step is we need to do extraction. So remember that we used C1, C2, and a little bit of C3 to interpolate the rest of C3. Question is whether or not this is a good extractor for a deleted share. And we show that indeed it is. And in fact, we even give a general family of high rate extractors for sources of entropy which satisfy the same requirements as the deleted shares. Okay, I'm going to skip past a whole bunch of slides so that we can get to the randomness extractor, and we'll discuss this a little bit, and then we'll be done. So randomness extractor just takes a source of entropy that's not purely random. I guess it could be purely random. But the idea is it's going to squeeze it down so that we get uniform randomness out of it. I'd like to note that this might be an interesting tool outside of secret sharing as well. So you might wonder, why do we need new extractors? Well, could we design a scheme without using polynomial interpolation? One option is we could use a seed extractor. This is the approach used by Broadbent and Islam. And seed extractors for quantum sources of entropy are pretty well understood. They've appeared a lot in things like quantum key distribution. Unfortunately, remember how we had trouble with theta? We got into this circle of needing to hide theta. We had the exact same trouble with the seed, because if the adversary sees the seed, then it can delete shares according to the seed, and this affects the source of randomness. But if the source of randomness depends on the seed, then there are no guarantees for the extractor. So if we were to hide the seed, then we'd already need adaptively secure secret sharing with certified deletion. Okay, well, what about seedless extractors? BK22 used an XOR extractor developed by ADKK23, and that doesn't need a seed at all. Unfortunately, it takes in a large input and only produces a single bit of output. But here, we need to take a whole share, because this is what was deleted, and we need to produce almost a whole share. So that's not going to work. We need something that has higher rate. Has both an output that's almost as large as the input. Okay, let's talk about the randomness source now. We're going to operate over a finite field K, and the input is going to be big M elements of K. The output is going to be little m elements of K. I know this looks intimidating, especially if you're not used to quantum notation. Let me break it down for you. This piece over here is the source register. This is what we're going to apply the extractor to. This piece over here is a side information register that the adversary is going to get after we do the extraction. These two are entangled, so the side information register has some information about the source of entry. The requirement that we're going to place on the source of entropy is it should be in superposition over essentially almost Fourier basis vectors. So this QFT is just transforming U to be in the Fourier basis, and we require that U is almost zero in the sense that very few of its non-zero position, or very few of its positions are non-zero. In particular, it should have big M minus little m over 2 positions, which are non-zero. So let me give you an example because I know that was a little abstract. Let's say that the adversary knew that the randomness source had some small number of positions which were encoded in the computational basis. And these are U2. For example, this could arise if it starts with our share and then measures a small number of positions in the computational basis. Just guessing that these are the data positions. On the other hand, it's definitely not going to touch the rest because if it keeps measuring more and more qubits, then sooner or later it's going to accidentally measure a check position and then the game's over for it. So here we can see that the adversary knows part of the source in the computational basis, a small part, and it knows the rest of the source in the half-part basis. Does the example make sense? Okay. So we've got our source, we've got the requirements on it. Now let's talk about the extractor. The extractor is just a matrix in K to the big M by little m, so it takes in vector of size big M, outputs something of size little m. And the way that we apply it is we measure the source in the computational basis to get little x, and we just output r times x. And the theorem is if every set of m columns of R is linearly independent, then the output is uniformly random, even if the adversary is given that side information register. Just a couple more minutes. I'm going to try and get through this quickly. Let's talk about its application to polynomial interpolation. We can write polynomial interpolation as it's a linear operation, so we can just write it as a sum of matrix and vector multiplications. It turns out that any polynomial matrix or interpolation matrix, if it's producing m outputs, then any m columns of it are linearly independent. And in particular, because R2 here is formed out of columns of R, R2 satisfies the same property. R2, you'll notice, is actually applied directly to something that's been deleted. And our deletion predicate says, well, if the deletion predicate is satisfied, then the deleted share must satisfy the source requirement. So our theorem implies that this middle term is uniformly random, which means that the result of the interpolation is uniformly random. Okay. This is the last slide. So there are a lot of interesting questions in this area. We've really only scratched the surface of it. So first, can we get adaptive certified deletion for general access structures? We only did it for threshold access structures. Is there a stronger definition that captures both distributed and adaptive attacks? And can we achieve it? How about public verification? Can we, right now in our current construction, you need some secret verification key in order to check the deletion certificate. Can we give out something public that can be used to check this deletion certificate? How about other threshold primitives? For example, signatures, right? Is it possible to have something where, given a whole bunch of shares of a signature or signing key, you can sign a secret, and then later you can actually delete your signing key, let's say if you get kicked off the board or something. Another interesting question is high rate commitments with certified deletion. Maybe we can apply the high rate extractors to get this. And there are many more questions, but I'm going to leave that for you guys to think of. Thanks for coming to the talk.